Like we talked about, age took down some of these teams. I don't think the Suns have that as much to worry about as some of the other big threes that failed. But leadership and health are two things that if they don't get that next year, I don't think they're going to have much of a chance to take that next step. And how do you get that leadership? It's a big question.
Gentlemen, is there anything the Suns can learn from these teams that we've talked about today?
All hope is lost?
Stop.
I mean, history is not on our side.
Well, I'll say this. I think, when you're looking at the Suns where they're at right now and what some of these teams have done and some of them didn't do, I do think you need a nice little balance of youth and age and experience. I think that's the thing that if the Suns don't win a championship with this group, I think they're going to look back at some of the things that they kind of fumbled down the stretch of the last 2 or 3 seasons, and like getting rid of quality assets or missing on draft picks or not taking the draft seriously, or even in trades, trading for guys that might be a little bit younger but also solid to contribute to the bottom line. And I think that's what they're ultimately going to look back, because it's all well and good that you want to get a whole veteran-led team. But we saw that didn't work for shit this year. All the veterans, sometimes they say, you can't teach a dog new tricks. That's absolutely what it felt like this year. It felt like we had 12 individuals that all had their own mind made up of how they were going to play basketball, and it never really ever synced up. And you got to figure that part out. And when you have young players like a Tumani Kamara, who we traded away, who's ready to be coached, who has that young exuberance to play at a high level, and you saw him do that at Portland, that would have been a nice, keep had they been able to hold on to him amongst other draft picks that we missed on in the past. So that's where I think ultimately it's going to come down to me, the front office. Like the front office's decisions in terms of how they construct this roster or how they constructed this roster are really going to, matter as they move forward. What are you going to be able to do in terms of flexibility? How are you going to infuse a little bit of youth and athleticism into this team? Because that was probably one of the more glaring things watching them play against the Timberwolves is, Jaden McDaniels was a problem. His length and his youth were just an issue. Edwards, you're going to have to face him every damn year now, because he's super young. So what are you going to do to combat that? I don't know if they have an answer for it.
Yeah, I look at it and like we talked about, age took down some of these teams. I don't think the Suns have that as much to worry about as some of the other big threes that failed. But leadership and health are two things that if they don't get that next year, I don't think they're going to have much of a chance to take that next step. And how do you get that leadership? It's a big question. But looking at this, I'm a little more hesitant to fire Frank Vogel just to fire Frank Vogel at this point, unless, like we talked about, that you have a championship pedigree coach that can come in. And I'm not just talking guy who won championship. I'm talking guy with a winner mentality, guy that can bring some semblance of culture and structure to this group that they lacked this year, and they're all, it's big question marks because health is going to be tough with this group. You just had Kevin Durant go through an unbelievably healthy season. Do you think you're going to get that in year 2? I don't know. I mean,
he did say it's because nobody hurt him.
Yeah,
that was the reason why he was able to be healthy this year, was because nobody else harmed him.
Yeah, well, let's be fair. He harmed himself when he was warming up the year before that took him out. That wasn't anybody else.
Yeah, it does. Why doesn't it count?
That one feels like it was like a fluke.
It was only like 10 games.
Only 10 games. Yeah.
That's not that. I mean, if he plays 72, that's pretty fucking good.
But to me, it's like, okay, you are rolling dice. That's the one guy that's 36 in next season, and so you are rolling the dice there with age and health, but. It's going to be a crapshoot. I know we're going to go over the limitations of what they can add, but you got to pull a rabbit out of your hat and find a bench too. You need some depth to be able to do this as well.
Last thing I'll say before we move on to those limitations, I know history can be instructive, but honestly, I don't feel any better or worse looking at these, because if you look at the common characteristics between the big threes that worked and the ones that didn't work, the Suns are kind of smack dab in the middle of those in terms of looking at ages, looking at where their defense ranked compared to these other teams. I think the big concerns are obviously a lack of resources to continue bringing in young talent, or a lack of interest in using those resources to bring in young talent. And to your point, like leadership, that has to be better next year. But for me, it's like I'm looking at these teams, and a lot of the teams, the big threes that didn't work, availability was their biggest issue. That was a big issue for the Suns, but they were nowhere near as underwhelming in their first season together as a lot of these big threes were that didn't work out. So that's kind of my one encouraging thing, is like, yes, they have things to improve. They have things to correct. They have things internally that need to be better in year two. But they were not the depressing travesty that they've been made out to be over the last few weeks, especially compared to some of these teams that we're looking at, like those Nets or Lakers teams that put a big three together. Like, I think they're smack dab in the middle, and you could argue they'll go either way, but I do think they have things that they can build on in year two.